Hi, I'm Rick Skinner. There's 12 generations of Skinners in America. I'm generation number 11. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our family and how we got here. We came from 9 different countries and have been here since 1659. First, I'm going to talk to you about Thomas Skinner. The first Skinner to come here was Thomas Skinner. He was born in England in 1617. He came to America 3 times in 1655, 1665, 66, and 69. The first 2 times he came as a passenger and earned money for doing that. On his last trip he went back to England, married his wife Elizabeth, and they came first to the state of Virginia, colony of Virginia, and then they went over to the eastern shore of Maryland, in which Dorchester County. He patented over 150 acres and added another 150 acres within 5 years and was a tobacco farmer. Unfortunately, after only 6 years in America, after becoming a successful tobacco farmer, as well as having 3 different kids, he died, leaving his wife with 3 children, all of them under the age of 6. She remarried a Henry Beckworth, and they raised their children in Dorchester County. When he died, he left his wife 23,942 pounds of fine tobacco. Tobacco was used as currency since there was no hard currency in then colonial America. Some of the land that he patented was called Skinner's Choice, Skinner's Discovery, and Skinner's Folly. Thomas's son was William. William married Hester LeComte. She was from France. Her father had been a French Huguenot who was evicted from his lands in France by the French government because he was a Huguenot and they were partial to the Catholic religion. He went to England as an immigrant and fought for the British, fought for the English in the wars. As a result, he was given 700 acres. He chose the land in Dorchester County called Cape Horn. He raised his family there after going back to France to marry his wife, Esther Dotlin. She was from Dieppe, France. After William married Hester LeComte, he sold our lands in Dorchester and he moved to Talbot County, where he patented over 150 acres very near what is today St. Michael's, Maryland. His will shows that when he died, we've gotten out of the tobacco farming business and into wheat and sheep. William's son was Philemon. We'll call him Philemon the First because there's been many a father in my family named Philemon. He married Lucy Hamilton. Lucy was of Welsh, Scotch, and English descent, and her family had been here for over 50 years before she was born. They had a substantial estate, or plantation as they called it that day, called Martingham, on the northeast side of St. Michael's. She was born there. They were married, and they patented more land and kept farming. Aside from Philemon being a farmer, he was also appointed constable of the county. He died in 1762. Our next generation is Philemon Jr. Philemon Jr. is unique because he was born and died on the same piece of land. Very few things is known about him. We don't even know the last name or maiden name of his wife Elizabeth. But he farmed the land until his death in sometime around 1790. And he is best known in the family for being a patriot because he took the oath of allegiance to the new American cause in 1778. The 5th generation was Zebulon Skinner, born in 1750 and died in 1817. He married Mary Ann Cannon. Mary Ann was also from a family that had long been in colonial America, and her father had patented over 500 acres in the inland in what is today Queen Anne's County. Zebulon was born a British subject but died an American. Zebulon's son was Philemon III. He was born in 1792 and lived to 1851, and he married Henrietta Charles. He was in the militia during the War of 1812 as a cavalry corporal. In 1823, he petitioned the court to receive the Cannon lands that were passed to his mother as dueful right when her father died. She had died before this, and it took him 3 years to convince the court of 5 judges to give him the 512 acres of land to be split between him and his siblings. None of his siblings wanted the land, so he bought them all out for $3 an acre for $1,551 and had a large farm there. Philemon was not only a successful farmer, but he tried other ventures. Him and his neighbor had the first patented potential silkworm farm, but that didn't work out. He also worked to build roads and open up streams, since they lived now in the Tuckahoe 100, which was at the top of where the Wye River ends into the Wye Mills. Our 7th generation is another farmer named Zebulon. He lived on his father's farm until he was 21 years of age. He married Catherine Elliott. Her father was born in Delaware and her mother was born in Maryland. Her father had been a butcher, a hotel keeper, and a merchant in what is today Centerville, Maryland. He died young, but he had my great-grandfather, Philemon Skinner, who was born in 1867. He would be the last farmer in our family, as Philemon would move to Wilmington, establish a grocery business, but you'll hear more about that from my father, Richard.
My grandfather, Philemon, died when I was probably around 11 years old, so there isn't an awful lot that I know about him. I know he came up from the Eastern Shore, where he had the grocery business, and felt it would be better up here. He had 2 or 3 different grocery stores up until he passed away and my father took over the store. He also built houses and stores, and the block 29th and Washington Street, he built almost a block, which he lived in one and sold my father the one next door. That's about the most I can talk about him, other than he showed me a $100 bill the first time I ever saw one, and I really didn't see much of him because he worked hard like my father did. He was married to my grandma, and they lived next door. My grandfather on that side of the family was a fireman and worked in industry and everything. One story I can remember, down at the Wilson line, there's a great big giant hook up there, and he got his thumb caught in it and he lost it. I can remember every time I go by the Wilson line, that's where it happened. He had a sideline where he raised rabbits for the medical tests, and then they moved out to the outskirts up near Conrad High School and worked a little 2-acre farm up in there. I can remember staying overnight there simply because the floor was always cold.
Why did he raise the rabbits?
For medical tests.
Which tests?
Pregnancy tests.
So how did that work in those days?
Well, if the rabbit died, I don't know.
Way back then? I wasn't sure they had that test way back then.
Yeah.
He raised rabbits. I remember that.
And he
That was the place down on 22nd Street. The last several years of his life, all I can remember is he was very sick. And when he passed, then the different girls, Mabel and Myrtle and Mother, they took care of my grandmother until she passed away. Grandmother Blanche came up from the Eastern Shore. In the family, her father served gallantly in the Civil War for 3 years, was wounded, but survived. The next thing I can say about my grandma, she was an extremely religious person who was one of the founders of the WCTU, which is Women's Temperance and all that. During the war, she spent a lot of time sewing uniforms for nurses, and her lived next door to my mother and father, and we shared a telephone. Sometimes you had to go across the street to answer the phone. I can remember having very large Thanksgiving dinners in my grandmother and grandfather's house. But I can remember when she passed away. That was after I had become married, because we visited her in the place that she spent her last few weeks. I can remember a few things of being religious and everything. She came over when we had our first television set and watched a show on a Thursday night. And she was very enthused, watched it till they came up with the commercial, and it was Schmidt's Brewery. She turned sideways on the couch and never looked at television again because the commercial was a beer commercial. I also know a story of her visiting my uncle's place down on the way to Rehoboth when she opened her refrigerator and it was full of beer, and oh well, I don't need to tell you what happened then. That was the end of that. First, let me say this, in all honesty, of all of my relatives that have passed on, I miss my father the most, because if you check the dates, you'll see that I was the youngest when he passed, and I didn't spend or have a lot of time with him. He also, being a grocery owner, he spent a lot of hours and a lot of time he wasn't available, but he did try to take me to ball games. We were great baseball fans, and I used to have to sneak out the back of the house and get in the back seat of the car in my uniform if we happened to be playing on a Sunday, so that my grandmother wouldn't see us. You can laugh about it, but she was a very serious woman when it came to Sunday. I can remember a couple times playing basketball and we needed transportation. He found time to close the store and take us across town. We did that on a few baseball games also. He went to Beacom College for night courses and worked in a gas station part-time, I guess to help supplement income for the family of my brother and I. I can remember taking him to see Argentino Rocca, the wrestler, over at Fournier Hall, and he really loved watching wrestling, except one night in Atlantic City they threw one out of the ring and landed on him. He was afraid to stand up. He thought he didn't have any legs anymore, but I do remember that. But unfortunately, he died at such an age. I was 18 within a couple days. I got my uniform for the Coast Guard and never got a chance to put it on. When I decided I was going to join the Coast Guard Reserve, I went down and I asked my father, what do you think? He said,
My mother was born in 1911. Her name was Mildred Lillian Sewell Hultberg. She loved to cook, and she loved to have family dinners. The house was usually full of people. During the war, she worked at a plant that made parachutes for the parachuters during the Second World War. She was a very energetic woman. Always had a lot of energy, was always doing things. Loved to have people in the house. She worked, later in years, she worked at the DuPont company. She took care of the cafeteria there.
Her parents?
Her mother was born in Maryland, had a big farm in Maryland. Her name was Mary Lillian Hobbs. She was from the Hobbs family. They came from a very large family. They had a farm in Maryland. She married my grandfather. His name was William E. Sewell. And they came to live in Wilmington, and they had 6 children. My mother was the oldest, and then she had 5 boys.
One thing I think is interesting is that your grandfather, William E. Sewell, started work at 12 in a woolen mill.
Yeah, my grandfather Sewell started working at 12 in a wool mill. Of course, and my mother, she had to quit school and go to work at Electric Hose and Rubber Company during the Depression so they'd have enough money for food. And my grandmother, who had a very kind heart, when they would come to the door begging for food, she would make them onion sandwiches and give them to them. And Grandpa later worked at Electric Hose and Rubber Company with his brother Leon. They both worked there.